Welcome to Kigali. We are live here at what we're calling the Red Threads. My name is Jeff Koinange, and I'll be your host between now and Thursday as we review and discuss with high-level guests the most relevant developments of each day of the summit. Now this year, the summit's theme is Feed the Cities, Grow the Continent, as we want to leverage urban food markets' increasing relevance to the small farmers and agribusiness in order to achieve sustainable food systems. Now, each day, the summit is dedicated to a specific theme: resilience, nutrition and health, markets and trade, and food systems. Today, all the discussions and activities focused on resilience, on how to enhance farmers and the agri-food sector's capability to absorb and recover from shocks and stresses. Now, 2020 is the first time the AGRF is virtual, but this did not compromise the quality of the attendance of the first day's sessions. Governments and civil society, the private sector, research community, and development partners are here together with a commitment to enhance resilience, create demand for nutrition, interconnect African markets, build sustainable food systems. Now, on this edition of Red Threads, I'll be receiving very special guests to review the main outcomes of today and share their insights on strategies to deliver healthy, safe, affordable, and accessible food to the cities. So, without further ado, and literally my guests are from around the world, we're going to go straight to them, right here live on this virtual summit. Okay, we'll take it from the top left. That is Dr. Barbara Albo. Now, she is in London. She's a principal researcher and team leader, agroecology of the International Institute for Environment Development. She joins us there from London. Right next to her, Gail Smith. She is the CEO of One Campaign, and she's a very ardent supporter of women's rights. We know that from the past. Bottom left, joining us again, and it's great to see you, is Santiago Albo. He joins us from Ottawa in Canada. And he is the Director, Agriculture and Environment for the International Development Research Center. Last but not least is Carlos Manuel Rodriguez. He is the Chairman and CEO of Global Environment Facility, GEF. He served 3 terms as Minister of Environment and Energy for Costa Rica. Folks, if you can hear me, this is Jeff in Kigali. Just quickly acknowledge if you can, and welcome to the Red Threads. Excellent. I think we're all in tune. Gail, can I go to you first, if I will? Now, on the session on women-led resilience and strategy today, we saw many examples, many incredible stories of women that, despite the challenges, have been able to keep production moving from field to fork, and now on their way to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change impact, etc. And we know there are government policies in place, but the question I want to ask you, Gail, is what more can be done to empower women in Africa to give them conditions to self-organize and lead their initiatives?
Thanks, Jeff, and it's great to be here with everybody, even if virtually. I'd say a few things. One is access to capital, and that's a question of making sure that laws and policies support equal access to capital for women. But it's also going the extra mile, because often it's more difficult for women to get into the system to get that capital. So that would be number one. Number two is, in parallel, obviously, equal access to land and to land title. Because in a lot of countries, we're seeing that women are the leaders of production, but they don't own the land underneath them, and that'll make a difference. It also provides collateral. But I think a third really interesting thing that's worth looking at is involving women producers more in building deliberate supply chains from rural to the cities. Often those supply chains are a bit ad hoc. It's wherever the buyers go, as opposed to the producers coming together in the aggregate and developing the supply chains that, again, can be relied on consistently. Because the other thing that women and any farmer needs is the reliability of purchase, and that's going to help get them through a particularly difficult period. And if you look, and it's anecdotal, but it's quite interesting, there are a significant number of businesses that have found that relying on women producers, there is enough initiative, I think, that comes from having to fight harder to get anything done to make those supply chains very, very reliable, which is what the market wants. So those three things would be my recommendations, Jeff.
Okay, and folks, please feel free to jump in at any point. Just raise your hand or give me a thumbs up, and I will acknowledge you, and you can just jump right in, because we want to have a conversation here. We want to make it as interactive as we can, because there's literally thousands of people who are tuned in, logged in online. So, Dr. Barbara Adolf, let me ask you, the new coronavirus exposed the vulnerabilities of our food systems, as the pandemic is causing disruptions in all stages of agri-food supply chain. Now, leaders are committed to making COVID-19 recovery an opportunity, a chance to build more resilient food systems. But the question I want to ask you is, how can we balance this need for short-term productivity and production gains with the sustainable and resilient food systems that we need? How can we balance that, Dr. Barbara?
Yes, indeed. I mean, meeting the pressing food system needs of today without compromising our ability to meet those of tomorrow and beyond has never been more challenging. In particular in sub-Saharan Africa, where cereal demand is actually expected to almost triple between 2010 and 2050 as a result of population increase and changes in diets. And as we heard earlier today from Brent Loken about the planetary health diet, most people in Africa actually eat less than the recommended amounts of protein and micronutrients. So Sheila Patel pointed out that young children in some of the poorest parts of Africa's cities are increasingly eating highly processed snacks. So much remains to be done. But you asked about trade-offs. Trade-offs are basically competing objectives or competing demands on what is effectively a finite resource, which is our planet. In relation to sustainable food systems, many of these objectives are very legitimate. Farmers want to increase their food security and income. Governments want to create employment and business opportunities, and we all want to protect our forest, wetlands, and biodiversity on which life depends. So a key trade-off in sub-Saharan Africa is really around land use. In most countries in sub-Saharan Africa, agricultural production increase over the past 20 years has been at least partially as a result of an expansion of the land under cultivation, so often resulting in a conversion of valuable natural habitats into farmland. Wetlands have been converted into vegetable gardens and rice fields, and valuable tropical forests have been turned into fields and plantations for cash crops. This is already resulting in irreversible damage to ecosystems, and with it, the ability of these ecosystems to provide essential functions and services to farmers and other value chain actors. As Tony Simmons said earlier today, if there are no forests in Africa, there will be no agriculture in Africa. So if this trend continued, some countries in sub-Saharan Africa would lose very soon whatever forests they have left. But these countries have signed up to international targets to reduce or even reverse deforestation. But even if there was massive reforestation, it would not replace the highly diverse natural forests that we are losing every day. There are clearly policy disconnects at national level, with different parts of government prioritizing different objectives without much harmonization. So there are land use trade-offs between food production and ecosystem conservation, with different stakeholders having different priorities. But there are also trade-offs in time between reaping economic benefits from food system activities now and in the short term, relying on high levels of carbon-intensive and sometimes environmentally damaging external inputs, and as a result, endangering the ability of ecosystems to support human life in the future, or to invest in sustainable, regenerative food systems now, which may mean lower productivity and profits in the short term, but preserving the resource base for future generations. So obviously this is a challenge not just for Africa, but the pressures on terrestrial ecosystems are particularly strong in Africa, and sufficient investments to develop resilient and sustainable food systems are not available. You may have seen the BioVision study from June 2020 that showed how funding support for African agricultural research is largely concentrated on agro-industrial practices, with very little going on into agroecological research and farmer-led innovation. So a starting point to address these trade-offs is to acknowledge them. We all want win-win solutions, but we all need to recognize that there are difficult choices to be made, and that these choices need to consider state-of-the-art knowledge, as well as citizens' priorities, in particular those citizens who are at the bottom of the pyramid, so the most vulnerable ones who often depend on natural resources for their livelihoods.
Okay, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, let me pick up on Dr. Barbara Adolph's last point there, feeding the continent. One of the main conclusions on this first day of the summit is that without a sustainable, equitable, and resilient food system, it will not be possible to feed 1 billion people in Africa in 2040. Now, your administration did an incredible job in advancing Costa Rica's sustainability agenda. As an environmentalist yourself, how can the environmental conservation contribute to delivering healthy, safe, affordable, and accessible food to cities?
Oh, thank you so much for this. And let me send my regards to my dear friends in Kigali. Costa Rica was able to double the size of the forest and triple the income per capita at the same time that doubled food production and increased dramatically in our food security, doing many things. And I will mention just three very basic elements. One is putting the science and data behind the decision-making processes. Second, narrowing the gap within data and technology. We got a lot of data and we don't have the technology to use that data for improved decision-making process. And most importantly, there was a institutional landscape approach. Normally in the country, you got many ministers dealing with many natural resources with little coordination or common planning, particularly within ministers of environment and agriculture. As you mentioned, I've been 3-time Minister of Environment in Costa Rica, and one of the most important political efforts were bringing together the Minister of Agriculture into what we call the institutional landscape approach, where we broke the tendency to work on silos in the same landscape and be able to work on a more integrated manner. Agricultural policies is the biggest threat to forest conservation, globally speaking. So we need to deal the issue internally from the institutional point of view. So if we are talking about sustainable landscape management, and this is an area where the GF constantly works on sustainable resilience for food security in Africa. It works on food system, land use, and restoration programs. These are transformational programs that dealing to promote a system transformation. And what the GF has been doing so far has been extremely interesting. But going to your question, generating political agreements within government is key because we see a lack of political coherence within our government. And this is something that Costa Rica, very straightforward, dealt with it, not just with agriculture, but also with mining and energy. The Minister of Environment in Costa Rica is also the Minister of Energy and Mining, which is very different to what you normally see in many other countries, where you got the conflict within extractive industry, non-renewable natural resources management, and the management of renewable natural resources. We broke those silos, which narrowed the gap, and the outcome was, improved landscape management.
Okay, Santiago Alba, let me go all the way to you in Ottawa, in Canada. Thinking outside the box. Obviously, the last 6 months have been unprecedented. The planet has literally been on pause. How can we unpause that and use it to our advantage?
Thank you, Jeff. I don't know how much is going to be out of the box because many things have been already said. I think we have a unique opportunity to rebuild with the lessons that we have, with the lessons of the pandemic, the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and climate change. But we will not repeat anything that is useful if it's not sustainable and if it's not inclusive. We cannot create systems that leave behind millions of people. And the systems that we have right now are leaving behind millions of people, and in particular women and girls. I think the second element that we need to create are systems that put back to the center of the discussions the two key actors of any food systems. the producers, the farmers, and the consumers. And in the case of cities, this space has been more and more far away, and we have an opportunity to bring them back to the discussion table and to the design, co-designing policies where farmers and consumers have a voice. I think the third element will be, as I think Carlos was mentioning, linking the different parts of the food systems. We cannot create policies that are within the Ministry of Agriculture, that are not connected to the Ministry of Health, that are managing nutrition, or with the ministries of trade or economy or finance. The policies need to be integrated. We need to create systems to link them. We have done some examples in how to link regulations in food supplies with consumption practices and with waste disposal. Those are three different levels of government, from national to regional to municipal. The policies need to talk to each other. I think we cannot forget what is the main objective of any food system, and is to nourish people. Any food policy needs to take in consideration nutrition and health. Healthy diets in a healthy planet should be the aim of any policy. And of course, there will be other benefits of the food systems on trade and economic development, but don't forget that we produce food because we eat. I think we need to not only connect, but to create robust connectivities. The current food system is extremely connected, but COVID had proven that it's not as robust as we thought. In the moment that we cross borders, everybody started panicking, markets are not working as we thought, and the final beneficiaries of the system, the farmers and the consumers, are the more affected by the change. I think we will not be able to reach the levels of sustainability, resilience, and inclusiveness and equality that we aim to if we are not able to monitor and to measure the impact of what we do. And many times we forget, when we develop policies, how we are going to measure the success of these policies, and this to be integrated.
Absolutely, Santiago, you mentioned a good point. And Gail Smith, if I can come back to you, Santiago mentioned health. And I will throw that back at you and say, what about mental health? Especially now with COVID-19, women bearing the greater burden. Schools are closed, so women at home looking after the kids. And then, of course, gender-based violence on the rise across the globe. Yeah. Obviously, that if we have to feed our cities and grow our continent, Gail, we have to start with the basics.
No, I think that's 1,000% right. And I'm struck by some of the previous comments. In response to your previous question, I think these connect. When you said, how can we use this to kind of build back and reconfigure a bit? And I'm struck by the number of comments that are about governments and how we organize ourselves to get the job done. One of the things the pandemic has laid bare is that governance or management that is by stovepipe, right? We have our cylinders of excellence. Agriculture is here, health is here, finance is here. It doesn't work very well because these external shocks ripple across every sector. So I think one of the things that is really worth teasing out, and there's an opportunity to do, is reimagine how government is organized. And I think we've already had a couple of examples of how this can be done. I think a Costa Rican example was very good. You take, for example, health and mental health. We've seen huge losses in all the gains made over the last 25 years in health. We are seeing an uptick in a rise in mental health problems, and as you rightly point out, gender-based violence is on the increase all over the world. I think, again, it comes to this word inclusion that the last speaker used. Unless our policies and programs are inclusive of all people and all sectors, there are going to be people that fall off the map. It's really, really that simple. So how do you do that? How do you integrate these things so that when you're deciding what is our post-pandemic response to the agriculture sector, all right, maybe the health minister needs to be there. Maybe if you have a gender minister, or arguably some governments have chosen to have gender be a cross-cutting issue, how do you bring those to the table at the forefront in the planning stages rather than waiting until a policy is developed, briefing other members of the cabinet or other members of the government, and hoping that it coincides with what they're doing? It's this integration again, this pandemic has hit every single sector of every economy, and we're not going to solve it by a fragmented response ministry.
Yep, I think we lost a bit of your audio there, Gail. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, I saw you nodding there. You're nodding your head. In agreement? You agree with some of the things that Gail is saying?
Yeah, totally. And we work based on a very strong presumption that we won't be able to do the leap forward in terms of our sustainability aspiration with the same institutional framework that in first place created the problem that we want to solve, the problem of on sustainability. And in this respect, I think that there are very important things that we need to really understand. First is that we work based on an economic model that generates a consumption and production patterns that is totally irrational and unsustainable. Our economic model aims for unlimited growth in a planet that has boundaries. And we need to really understand that in the context of the new normality, this is one of the most important issues that we need to address at the global level, because we won't have the opportunity in terms of our sustainability aspiration if we go back to normality, to business as usual, to the same consumption production pattern that is short-minded and that is even irresponsible in terms of our intra-generational responsibilities. So we got the science, we already have the targets in terms of sustainability, the climate targets, the nature conservation targets, the sustainable development targets. But let me just finish by saying 4 things that are really, really important in terms of generating food security and being able to provide the demand for food in cities. We need to really first understand that soil conservation and soil is key. We haven't positioned soil as a key natural resources in the context of our global aspiration. We talk about the atmosphere and climate change, we talk about forests and biodiversity, but the soil is key. So integrated soil fertility management is a key element. I think that the second important element is moving, as was said by Barbara, into conservation agriculture. Rainwater harvesting sounds like logic, but we don't do it. And we need to do it large scale, particularly on those areas who are threatened by climate change and are already arid lands. Agroforestry, planting trees and producing food, it's a no-brainer. It's been done in many parts of the world. We need to really scale up. And then, and most importantly for me, ecosystem-based adaptation for smallholder farmers and reduction of post-harvest losses. That is key in the context of Africa.
Yeah, Dr. Barbara Adolf, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez talks about a no-brainer, and yet we keep absorbing shock after shock after shock. Are we going to be able to maintain this going forward? From climate change to COVID, and there will be more shocks.
There will definitely be more shocks, and they will play out in different ways for different people. So it's interesting what Carlos said about food consumption, because clearly the sort of Western or Northern model of food consumption isn't sustainable. But we mustn't forget that in Africa, a lot of people are still not consuming the bare minimum they need, not just in terms of quantity and quality, but also quality, protein and micronutrients and so on. So whilst there are parts of the world where probably we need to really reduce our diets to make it more planetary friendly, Africa is still on the rise in many ways. And so, I think the problem looks different in different contexts. And I really think that this sort of land use competition between land for agriculture and land for conservation and ecosystem services, as Carlos said very clearly, very important for food production, to get that balance right and manage that competition in a way that is socially just, as Gail said, and leaves no one behind, especially not women, but also where things actually stack up, where we can still produce enough food to meet these growing demands.
Santiago Alba, I see you nodding your head again there. You're nodding.
I am because I think these elements of how we bring together the and I think in particular for today's topic on the cities, the role of a new way of distribution territories, and how we face spaces in peri-urban big cities, peri-urban Nairobi that operates as rural centers, but we at the same time see how rural small cities have access to information as never before. And then what is the power of knowledge and data in that space, and how knowledge, when it becomes a common good, can really inform and influence the decisions that we take. How that knowledge is not anymore in the hands of a few, but what is the role of civil society and engaging with researchers and engaging with private sector to really engage with governments. And I think from any strategy that we develop, I think like we need to go to no conventional alliances, these opportunities to really bring these debates of equality and fairness to the development of knowledge and the role of research. For IDRC, of course, research is a tool to bring development and justice. And I think we have opportunities, and we have opportunities in the cities that we didn't have before. And again, we have opportunities in the rural areas that were so far some time ago. And I really want to pick up on Barbara's point about how the systems that we have today are bringing at the same time and the same spaces 800 million undernourished and 2 billion overweight. And in many cases, it's not anymore a case of overweight in the global north and malnourishment in the global south. We have both in both places. We are seeing this in vulnerable communities that don't have access to the right diets, because what we are producing is not probably what we need, and because what we are consuming is not what, or we have access to is not what we need. I think any effective governance policies need to facilitate and to bring together those spaces of dialogue that also create transparency. I think one aspect that will help with governance will be the building of trust, and knowledge and data can help us to build that trust. We have seen this in bringing together corporations that create technologies for apps for farmers, seed producers, and insurance companies. When they bring together, and we have an experience in Kenya, suddenly the building of trust, creating a space where insurance to farmers that are affected by climate change can create an aspect of sharing information with the seed companies and the farmers itself almost in real time. So I think we are in a moment of opportunity that we cannot lose. And I think to close to one of your comments, there will be more shocks. I don't think climate change is a shock that we have still overcome. Unfortunately, we only have 10 years to make our point. But building resilience of people, and not only resilient systems, will actually make people being able to adapt to the next change and the next shock. And I think that's what one of the shifting that we are seeing. We're not talking only about the resilience of systems, but the resilience of communities, the resilience of people. And in that people, I go back, is the farmers, are the consumers.
Folks, when Santiago Alba mentioned the word transparency, all of you nodded at the same time. Gail, you particularly.
Well, I think there are two reasons. It's a good practice, I think, for governments and quite frankly also the market to be transparent. Because remember, one of the other things we've seen in this crisis is a lack of transparency in the market, meaning that it's been very difficult to find out what supplies and what commodities are where. So it's a generally good practice. But the other thing I think we find all over the place, and a great example of this was just given about the people working on apps and the insurance companies coming together, is that when people, companies, entrepreneurs have access to the data and information that is transparently available, more often than not, they will do something useful with it because it unmasks some things that are there. And I think this just gets to another point I just want to inject into the discussion, which is what is the role of governments in incentivizing any of this? And that's another place where I don't think we want a scenario where the government tries to control every bit and piece of it. But I do think whether it's on the issues of supply from rural to urban, women farmers, incentivizing, supporting subsistence level producers, there are all sorts of things that can be done at the government level to provide incentives for businesses that are going to aggregate markets. They're going to do some of the things that are being described here. And I just think that's another tool we shouldn't forget.
Yeah. Dr. Barbara Adolph, I see you're about to say something.
I mean, I agree with Gail about the bit on incentivizing, but incentivizing what? That is a big question.
Exactly.
And I think what we see, or well, I've seen it definitely in many places where I've worked in Africa, is that often the interventions, as well-meaning as they are, they still have a very short-termism kind of, quick gains, quick economic gains, electoral cycles, both from the donor side and from the African governments implementing strategies. So I think we need to move away from that and really think in the long term, because we can't expect farmers to do it. I mean, we heard a lot today about how farmers are often forced, farmers, consumers, and other value chain actors are forced to do things in an unsustainable way, not out of ignorance or even out of knowledge, but sheer access to resources or, having the bare minimum to survive. So if we want to move people away from thinking about short-term solutions, we need to provide the right support, and that might mean that we don't get these quick gains that everybody is after. And yeah, I think that is really important. And actually, during the lockdown, we had a bit more time to read than we normally have, not spending quite so much time commuting and so on. And one of the best books I read actually was entitled The Good Ancestor, How to Think Long-Term in a Short-Term World. You can look it up on Google if you want. It's by a guy called Roman Krznaric. And it makes a really strong plea for long-term thinking. And so the idea being that, our great-grandchildren will say that we made wise choices and not just easy, quick choices. And yeah, so hopefully that will help a little bit.
Look up that book. I'll definitely look up that book. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, you're a very good student. I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, yes, I want to continue building on what Gail and Barbara just mentioned. We humans are incentivizing and subsidizing the wrong activities.
Yes.
We invest many more times resources in activities that deplete and damage the planet than what we invest in keeping it safety. People cannot thrive in a sick planet. And even though it sounds like logic and rational, if you see the numbers, we are investing in the wrong direction. Let me give you one very specific numbers. We humans invest 142 times more resources in activities that generates tropical deforestation than what we invest in forest conservation. So if you see how we manage the fossil fuel industry, totally subsidized. And if we see the big agriculture subsidized as well. But those good activities, those good land use activities are not being recognized. And I'm not saying that we need to subsidize them or financially support them, just recognize the positive externalities that they provide. Small scale farmer done agriculture generate us a lot of environmental services, which are positive externalities that are not being reflected. How we price the food or how we establish the market policies. If we began leveling the economic playing field and fully internalize those negative externalities and tax those things that are bad for humans and the planet, whoa, the scale of the impact will be tremendous. And this is one of the pending agendas that we need to deal with. So we need to phase out perverse incentives, subsidies, and then we need to begin addressing the issue of banking and financial investment. Banks, the big funds, and the market capital are still investing their resources in the wrong businesses. So we need to really green up the whole investment sector beyond banks and be able at the same time to invest in leveling the economic playing field by which, so we can be able to, through a good green tax system, to have the proper investment that will keep us on track for our sustainability aspirations.
Gail, and yet the topic for today, and folks, the topic for today was resilience. How do we stay resilient when a lot of the times it feels like one step forward, 3 steps backwards?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm really eager to read this good ancestor book, because I think real resilience means, number one, long-term thinking. We can't just leap from crisis to crisis, which is what tends to happen. We go through a crisis, we pay extra attention for a short time afterwards, and then we revert back to normal. So how do we think long-term about this? One really useful thing to do is to do a diagnostic and say, what are all the places that extreme vulnerability and fragility appeared during this pandemic, and what does that mean we need to do? I think the second is to marry, you know, we talked earlier about integration within governments. We also need to marry up issues. Often I go to meetings or sessions that are on agriculture, and then you go to one that's on climate change, and then you one that's on poverty, and one that's on gender and women. And there's some cross-cutting issues. And if you look at where we've got acute vulnerabilities, the extreme poor, those who live in poverty generally, are the most vulnerable to external shocks. And as you rightly said, climate change, pandemics, this is not the last virus we're going to see. Commodity price fluctuations, wars, refugee influxes, we're going to continue to see that. There's some excellent work being done on resilience in each of those sectors. It's not knitted together, which means two things. A, we're not learning the lessons we could from each of those. And B, we're not getting to scale. And scale, I think, is the answer to avoiding the leap from crisis to crisis. Scale, scale, scale. When I was USAID administrator, it was a great job, but I did have some frustrations. And one of them was a lot of great ideas would come out, a lot of great projects and a lot of great programs. Very little of it was taken to scale. Resilience programming that looks at inputs, that looks at agriculture, that looks at climate, that looks at health, that looks at inclusion, that can be done at scale at relatively low cost, far cheaper than some of the things that we are having to do or going to have to do for failing to do so. But unless and until we pull these individual wonderful things together and look at resilience not just as the sole territory of a sector, but as a cross-cutting issue, we won't get to scale. And scale is what's going to be the game changer, in my view.
Yeah, Dr. Barbara Adolph, I saw you nodding and smiling a couple of times.
Yeah, so one can't really disagree with that. So, but I guess it's about investment in this long-term resilience and investing in the capacities for that. And these capacities, the tricky thing is that it's only when we have a crisis like COVID or other crises that we actually realize we really need these capacities. And they might lie dormant for a whole while, and they might not reap immediate economic benefits. So this is why I think there's a reluctance to invest in this, because you can't directly translate it into economic gains in the short term. But obviously, when something really bad happens, like COVID, we do realize that it was a useful investment. And I think there have been studies now saying that countries that have actually invested in good health systems, in social protection and so on, are being less hard hit than those who haven't. And yeah, I fully agree also on the disconnect, policy disconnect at all levels. That is really a big challenge, and probably a lot more could be done there. But we've been saying that for a very long time, not just for Africa, but for our own countries. And definitely in the UK, I think we are still strongly struggling with that. So I don't think we have any lessons to share on how to do it better.
Santiago Alba, there you go, very good student. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing, because I think a key element of resilience is the increasing choices. We cannot forget that one is more resilient as more choices we have to respond to the crisis. And we have tended to respond and mostly with the most vulnerable communities, with the smallholder farmers, with one solution to fit all. And I think we need to diversify the choices so people become more resilient. Resilient is not that you know how to change your spear tire in the car is that you have one spare tire. And when I was living in Namibia many years ago, I learned that you need probably two before you reach the next gas station. We need choices, and most of the poor communities in Africa don't have those choices. So the policies need to build them and to diversify the different solutions that we have to the different problems and issues that we'll be raising.
Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, I like that. There's no one solution. What one thing can you say that, let's say, Africa can learn from Costa Rica, from your turnaround, from the miracle over there? What's the one thing you would say?
Heavily and sustainably invest in education. This is what Costa Rica has done for 190 years as an independent nation. We've been doing that. And the other political decision that I'm not precisely recommending at this point, but for us was key, was the abolishment of the army. 75 years ago, Costa Ricans abolished the army, and we reinvest those resources in education and a social security care, healthcare system that has provided us multiple benefits. So investing, my message is invest in your richest resource. Your richest resource are the people. And this is what Costa Rica has done. As we've been able to invest in our human resource, we've been able to overcome development issues. We have generated security. And these are the greatest enabling conditions we had to protect nature. And now nature is providing us with a strong economic alternatives. And there's a lot of green jobs related to conservation, our conservation agenda, protected areas, management, and biodiversity conservation. So my recommendation is focus on your investment, on your richest resource, which is your human resource.
Gail Smith, education, education, education. Are we investing enough in women's education? Because clearly women are the backbone of this continent.
Well, I don't think we're investing enough in education overall. We certainly have a deficit in girls' education, but also in boys. So I couldn't agree more with the notion of investing in education, education, education. Education is about access. Education is about jobs. So I think the answer is no. Now, I will say, I think we've seen improvements. We've seen increases across Africa in expenditure, but much, much more needs to be invested if we want to get to our goals and aspirations, for certain.
Yeah. Dr. Barbara Adolph, you agree?
Yes, one can't disagree with more education, but it also depends on the type of education. And I don't know much about school education. It's not really my area of expertise, but we talked earlier on about agriculture extension services and access to technical support for farmers. And I think there are good and bad examples. And it's not just about having more access to knowledge and technology, but also the type of technology. And very often, I mean, this relates really to what Santiago was saying earlier on about choices. There isn't usually one answer, and that one answer isn't necessarily a high external input, complicated technology. It might be, but it might not be. And what I don't see in African extension systems is actually giving farmers choices and different technological options for different groups of people, for women, for men, for younger people, for older people, for wealthier people. There's always this sort of one size fits all. And one sees projects come in again and again with a sort of technology package, even though that has been long discredited through a lot of research, saying this doesn't really work or it doesn't lead to long-term changes, just short-term adoption, and then discarding these packages again once the interventions and incentives have stopped. And what we need instead is really a basket of options that works for different types of farmers. And for some, it might be the high-tech sort of solution. For the others, it might be something fairly basic like animal traction or earlier I think Carlos mentioned integrated soil fertility management, which needs some skills or so, but not necessarily a huge amount of resources. So sort of making technologies and education fit for the purpose is really important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go around the world, literally, and ask you about this topic, build back better. Going forward, let's start in Ottawa, Canada. Santiago, build back better. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are connected to the urgency of doing it. We have literally less than 10 years to turn the curve on climate change. COVID has been a reminder of what happens when you have global threats that affects everybody, and I think it's an opportunity to act because it's now or never, and I don't think there's not other choice. Barbara was mentioning how future generations will evaluate us. We have to be sure that there's going to be future generations to evaluate us, and we are risking that with the choices that we take in the next 5 to 10 years.
Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, if you can still hear us. Build back better, is it now or never?
Well, definitely yes, and that is the main role of the AGRF, which this fund that I'm leading, which is in the line with our mandate as the financial mechanism for the global environment. So we are committed to work with African countries to create the space for advancing impactful investment to support the transformation of agriculture, land use, food system, forest conservation, and promote urban sustainability and fostering circularity in production and consumption. As I said, one of the biggest challenges that we confront is the irrational consumption and production system. So our commitment is to continue investing in food security, sustainability, resilience from the agricultural sector in Africa.
Yep. From Costa Rica, let's go all the way to Washington, D.C. Gail Smith, build back better, now or never?
Yes, and please do it quickly. And I'd say two things. Wearing my hats as having been a government official, but also having been an activist and an advocate. There's a very short window here for any politician to say, all right, we're going to do things differently and in radical proportion, because this pandemic has been so disruptive and so damaging to everyone everywhere that window exists. So number one, governments need to take the risk now, bearing in mind, obviously, has been mentioned, the specter of climate change, but again, we got to take advantage of the moment of the shock that everybody's been through. But the flip side of that is, governments are only as good as their citizens make them. So there's also an opportunity here, and I think it's a short window for civil society, for organizations like this one, for communities to put forward bold solutions and make the case. And I think that's a now or never proposition. Now is the time to get the big ideas in front of the decision makers, because they need to come out of the box as we emerge from this. And trust me, we aren't yet anywhere near emerging, but we need to come back proving that we can and will build back better.
Dr. Barbara Adolph, let's take that point. Governments need to take risks now. But then the citizenry in some countries is waiting for the government to give them direction, especially with this pandemic. You're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, I guess that depends very much on the political context in the country where you live. Depends on to what extent citizens will accept guidance or strong measures from the government or rebel against them. My main concern with that is really that the poorest people will lose out again, because we've seen very strongly with COVID that it's the poorest consumers, the poorest producers, the poorest people in the food system who have lost out. It's those in the informal sector who have, on the one hand, collectively been very resilient and made sure that food still reached poorer households, but individually probably been quite hard hit by closure of open markets and so on. So how do we make sure that whatever we build back is actually taking the needs of these poorest people into account, who might not be those ones who are the strongest advocates and who have the loudest voice and are the best organized? What I've seen in the UK, at least, is that there has been a new wave of sort of solidarity, people looking out for each other, neighbors talking to each other. I live in London, it's not the most friendly place on earth. And yet, all of a sudden people go shopping for their neighbors and maybe there is that kind of spirit of making sure that whatever we build back is actually working for everyone and not just for the better off.
Yeah, but Santiago, Albert, this working together, going shopping for each other, suddenly finding our humanity, is that a one-off? Do you think it's just a one-off and then 6 months from now, once a vaccine is found, oh, life goes back to normal?
Well, it will be one-off for some, I don't think, but I don't think that it will be naive to think that the changes that we are going through are not going to actually change who we are as individuals and as society. I think we are going through one of the biggest disruptions in modern history, and I presume that that the changes will be bigger than we can even envision right now or foresee. I want to believe that it's an opportunity. I think the voices of civil society, of consumers, of investors, the new approaches or the new ways of measuring success. I was mentioning at the beginning of the discussion the value of indicators. We are many times we invest what we measure. So maybe as we change what we value, we can invest in a different way, and that will have quite a potential positive outcome in the society that we are building together. If I was not an optimist, I would not be in this job. I think we can build together better, and I think in general the signals are and the figures are that we are building better. As in any change, and we are in this kind of important change in human history, it will have some moments of questioning, but I think the final outcome, I'm very positive, will be better for humanity and the planet.
Yeah, I hope we're all eternal optimists. And on this panel, at least you guys have been very optimistic. I'm going to go around the panel once again. You guys have been fantastic guests. Thank you so much for your time. I want some closing thoughts. We're going to start in Costa Rica. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, going forward, today's topic, resilience. Going forward, let's have your thoughts.
I think that we have three things in our favor to continue being to be rationally optimistic. One is we got the technology to do it. Secondly, we got the resources at the global level. There's enough resources to take care of nature and be able to move towards a new, production paradigm. With just investing 1.3% of the global GDP, we can fix many of the problems that we're dealing, and we won't be talking about resilience. But the challenge is on the political realm. We won't be able to do the leap forward with all the technology and resources if we don't improve in governance at our country level. We need dramatically to improve in terms of good governance. This is not just an issue of transparency and corruption or gender equality. It's good governance in the good sense, the governance that is rooted on principles and values. And this is something that our countries has proven to be far from. And I'm not just talking with regards to our developing nations. I'm talking every single nation needs to dramatically improve in good governance, so there will be policies that are coherent with our aspiration of sustainability. Thank you.
I agree, especially with that last part, good governance. Dr. Barbara Adolph, bottom line, going forward, resilience as the theme today.
I agree with Carlos that governance is important, and within that, I mean, I said that before, but the long-term thinking is really critical. And that long-term thinking also means, maybe I'm slightly less optimistic there than Santiago, that we do sometimes have to make these really difficult choices because we can't have it all, we can't, there are sometimes really limited resources, and even with the best technology in the world, we have to make priorities and decide which ones we are going to, in the short or long term, and for which type of actors we are going to prioritize their needs at that moment. And what I'm really missing very much is a more open policy debate about these difficult choices. We are constantly presented with this illusion of win-win situations. And obviously development NGOs love win-wins and governments love win-wins, but sometimes there isn't a win-win. So the question is, how do you make the win-lose, lose-win as painless for those who are losing out? And I would really like to see a much more explicit acknowledgement of trade-offs, of competing objectives, and then a good governance system which involves citizens in making the choices about what priorities should matter at a given time, and taking on board the voice of citizens at that time. And this would be a big improvement, I think.
Yeah, Santiago Alba, is there such a thing as a win-win? Because if you win, there's a winner, there's got to be a loser.
No, we are. I think Barbara put it out when saying the trade-off. I think the win-win is that we all win. Right now we have a system that only some win and we all lose. If we think of a big change, we were talking about the power of data and information. We are moving from a space where information was supposed to be who controls information, controls everything, to who shares information actually builds stronger. And I think that's, and we see a new generation also that is shifting values and priorities, and we still have the streets full of people fighting for causes that were forgotten a decade ago, and or new ones with a big movement on climate change or Black Lives Matter or others. I think it's a shift of values, and in those values and goes back, we all can win. The question is that we have to agree on those values, and that's always a very difficult discussion because it goes to the deepest of a social and philosophical debate that is not easy, and sometimes it's nasty, but we cannot avoid.
Yeah, Gail Smith, before you give me your closing thoughts, win-win, win-lose?
I think win-win is what people say when they want to persuade you to agree with them. They tell you it's a win-win. And I think, look, I'm fully on board with the point about governance. I couldn't agree more. I think governance is something we're fortunate when we occasionally have enlightened governments and really serious and good leaders. We can't count on that in every case. None of these things are going to happen just because we wish them so. So I would say there are four things I think we need to think about. One is making the financial case for the kinds of recommendations that have been made here. We actually know that in terms of trade-offs, it is much cheaper to make some of the choices that have been articulated here than to continue doing what we're doing. But I think we've got to make that financial case accompanied by data and real figures that it is a more cost-effective thing to do to make these changes in agriculture for climate change and other things. The second is organize. Always we need to organize. We are seeing a lot of global advocacy go global, where we've got greater alignment among people across multiple countries. That matters. Organizing within countries across sectors, a louder voice has a greater chance of getting through. I think the third is, and I think Barbara's point on trade-offs is absolutely right. We want to believe that we can do everything. The question, I think, is how do we prioritize and then sequence? We can't do everything at once, but we've got to make those hard choices. And then the last thing is, how do we make some of these issues, whether they are the more technical issues pertinent to the agricultural sector or production or climate or finance, and policy issues, more accessible to citizens. A lot of these discussions go on at levels that people tune out very quickly because it's all government speak, policy speak, technical expertise. We need interpreters, and I think many of them are participating in this forum, who can render those policy choices more explicit and more clear. And then I think we'll see people pay far more attention and get far more active.
Yeah. Gail Smith in Washington, D.C., Dr. Barbara Adolph in London, England, Santiago Alba in Ottawa, Canada, and Carlos Manuel Rodriguez in Costa Rica. This is truly global. We appreciate your time, folks. I know you're on the other side of the planet, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, yeah.
Thanks.
Everyone.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Bye,
let's continue.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Let's continue the conversation, folks. The hashtag is at Virtual Summit, at Feed the Cities, hashtag Build the Continent, and of course, at AGRF 2020. All the hashtag, Feed the Cities, Build the Continent, Virtual Summit. That's what we're going to be doing. Today's theme was resilience. Tomorrow, we speak about nutrition. We'll have a red thread, just like we did today, tomorrow evening, 6:15 Kigali time. But before that, in the morning, 10 a.m. Kigali time, Good Morning AGRF with Yvonne Mbabazi and 4 youth anchors from around the continent. Please join that conversation, 10 a.m. Kigali time. Keep tuning in, keep logging on, keep questioning, keep commenting. That's why we're here, and we're going to be here throughout the week. Thank you so much, folks, for joining us tonight. Good night from Kigali. We'll see you tomorrow.